have left in cash, and that's going to, cover me for 1 year, 2 years worth of spending.
Mm-hmm.
In a market downturn, you say, you know what, I'm now going to turn off my withdrawals from my investment. I'm just going to let that sit there. And yes, there's going to be a downturn, and yes, I'm going to be saying, well, it's not going to feel good.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics such as investing, cash flow, budgeting, saving, passive income, debt management, and much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are back again, back on the 360 Money Matters podcast.
Andrew, we are back and talking. Look, these topics just keep getting better and better and better. And you have to take the credit for it because they're fantastic. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stay quiet. You can introduce this because I reckon this one is an absolute ripper.
Yeah, so today we are talking about the retirement danger zone. So we're talking about the first 5 years in retirement and why that is the danger zone when you're entering into retirement. Financially speaking, obviously.
Financially speaking, highway to... Okay, no singing. Andrew, the first 5 years matter so much with this. Why do the first 5 years in retirement, when you're drawing down from your retirement savings, why do the first 5 years matter so much?
So the reason that the first, and it's not 5 years, it's not 3 years, it's not, but what we're trying to talk about here is the first few years. It's the sequencing risk, and easiest example of it is let's say, for argument's sake, and not that this strategy will work, but let's say you've got a particular portfolio, let's say it's worth $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you've built up this nest egg, whether it's in super, not super, regardless, of what it is. But let's say you're drawing an income out of that, $100,000 a year in order to cover all of your living expenses. Performs at 10%, fantastic news. You're at $1 million next year, and essentially it's covered all of your living expenses. Let's say at the beginning of the time period, it doesn't perform at 10%. And let's say at the beginning of the time period, the day that you start retiring, it performs at negative 10% and you're still drawing income out. Well, now all of a sudden, if the market drops and that $1 million is worth $900,000, you've now crystallized, you're still withdrawing $100,000 and you've crystallized a portion of the loss. So 10% of the loss you've actually already sold down, or 10% of the investment you've already sold down. And even if there is a growth back up to levels where they were previously, because you've sold at the bottom, or because you sold recently after the asset has gone down in risk or has gone down in value, you're now not actually making that money back up. So the first few years of retirement, or the early years as you start beginning to draw income from a portfolio, is so hugely important. Is if the market falls, while you're actually still drawing money out, it may never actually recover to the level that it was previously.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing, Andrew. Like, realistically, it's one of those things that is a real challenge in our industry. And we'll talk about how we sort of manage that and offset it and things like that. But, you can't plan, well, you plan your retirement when you're going to stop and what have you, but you can't plan when the market's going to do negative or not perform to your expectations versus when it is. And I guess that's where the adage comes from around, different techniques. And we'll talk about these around bucketing strategies. And, people may have heard of only drawing 4% of the total balance each year and adjusting the drawdown rate based on what that looks like. But sequencing risk plays such a huge role. And the disheartening part is that you can do absolutely everything right. You can save, you can make additional contributions, you can live within your means. And then if you're just unlucky enough that tends to happen in your first year of, say, retirement, or your first couple of years of retirement, and drawing on that, and that's your sole source of income, it can create, well, it's not, the money basically is not going to last as long as what you had expected.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, in a practical sense, when we look at the data within Australia about retirees and when they do pass away, they do tend to pass away with a lot of money left in superannuation. So people aren't even spending that. So I'm not trying to justify, you just take it out recklessly regardless of what the markets are doing. But I think there's probably, that helps highlight the trepidation around, am I going to run out of money? So I don't take it out aggressively enough. And then you go and couple it with what we're talking about, sequencing risk, and people look at this and go, oh, geez, I just need to make sure that it lasts, and whatever it is, it's not going to serve me in terms of the income that I need. I'm just going to be cautious and kind of play it safe.
Yeah. And, there's an interesting book, I'm ever going on a bit of a tangent here, but there's an interesting book around, dying with zero, and some of the concepts around that. But I think there's a term for it, and there's a financial term, and it's called sequencing risk. It's essentially what we're talking about here. And the concept is that, let's assume that you have, two particular investments, let's say two retirees, both retire at the age of, say, 65, they've got access to their superannuation. And let's say that both of these retirees live till 95, right? 30-year time horizon. If these retirees still make the same average return, but retiree A experiences a market downturn at the beginning of the period, and retiree B experiences a market downturn maybe 5 or 10 years later in their portfolio, the person who experienced a negative return early will actually deplete faster because of the fact that early downturn doesn't give you time in order to recover as you're still drawing money out. So even though the average return can be the same, and if you look at a number over a long period of time and you say, okay, average return is still the same, theoretically it should give you the same result. Well, no, because you're actually drawing down upon it. So that average return is not as relevant as when the downturn actually happened.
Yeah. And the withdrawals make the market falls worse as well too. So using it as an example, and what we, maybe when someone's in accumulation, when you're requiring more assets at a cheaper price. Yeah. Right. So everybody understands that. It could be taking advantage of a market correction or a downward cycle or dollar cost averaging, but the same works the other way as well too. So if you're drawing on, your retirement savings in a downward market to fund your lifestyle, you might be selling more of the underlying investment to get the money that you need in order to fund your lifestyle. So you're depleting it and eating into it even faster when prices are lower than what they have traditionally been. So it actually makes it worse in that instance. Andrew, probably now is a good time to pivot into some of the strategies about how we offset some of this stuff, because, look, realistically, from an advice perspective, we do know that this stuff happens and we plan accordingly for it. So it's not just, hey, it's a phenomenon that you have to be lucky to avoid. So, Andrew, what are some of the things? How do we think about it? What do we talk to people about?
Look, one of the ways that you can reduce some of the impact of it, and everything is going to come with, there's no solution, there are only trade-offs, right?
Yep.
So, so one of the options is looking at, okay, what about a cash buffer strategy? So you say, okay, I'm going to draw down upon my investment, that's fine, but I'm actually going to have a cash buffer of, say, 1 to 3 years. I mean, 3 years is probably excessive, but you even see people that will retain cash in retirement for 12, 18 months. And the reason that you could do it, or the reason that pretty simple strategy is powerful is, okay, let's say I've got, 90% of my money that's invested in the market, 10% that I've left in cash, and that's going to, cover me for 1 year, 2 years worth of spending. Mm-hmm. In a market downturn, you say, you know what, I'm now going to turn off my withdrawals from my investment. I'm just going to let that sit there. And yes, there's going to be a downturn, and yes, I'm going to be saying, well, it's not going to feel good, but I'm not drawing down upon the investment. Yeah. And so it gives you enough time to wait until the market recovers. As the market recovers, then you start your downturn. So you're not actually drawing down upon an investment at a point in time at which it's declining. You could also do the same thing in reverse. So in a period where the market is rising, you might say, okay, the market's rising. Now's a time where I can afford to take money out of my investments in order to build up cash reserves for a future decline and preempt that happening in order to have a higher amount of cash reserves. But it gives you the flexibility to dial up and dial down your drawdown from your investment.
Yep.
Now, the risk is you're missing out on some potential upside. So if you're leaving money behind in cash and the market is going up, you're missing out on the potential upside of that money being invested and growing and generating an income, supplement your lifestyle. I would, and I think that everyone should have, to some degree, a cash reserve strategy. Depending on your risk tolerance strategy, where your assets are, will determine how much that should be. But I would argue that at a point in time where you're drawing down on your income, you're thinking about longevity of funds. Yes, there's some potential upside, but the thing that's going to make the most dramatic impact to your life is having sufficient money. Having that little bit of extra is a cherry on top, and it doesn't actually change the quality of your life. So very much a firm believer that there should be, and the right cash reserve is different for everyone. There should definitely be a cash reserve or a cash buffer strategy.
I mean, we always talk about sleep test. So I think this is a pretty good example. Yes, you may be forfeiting some gains in the short term, but you're providing yourself with that certainty. And I think the sleep test, making sure it doesn't keep you up at night and you feel comfortable with your strategy, is probably more important than those lost gains that you could be having. I'm just going to use a practical example of, say, a bucketing strategy that we talk to people about. So if you think about 3 buckets, nice and easy. Maybe the first bucket is a siloed investment that's designed to meet your short-term cash needs. And we could talk, say, 1 to 3 years. It really doesn't make too much of a difference in this scenario, but there's 3 ones. One bucket is short-term, one bucket is medium-term, and one bucket is longer-term. So if you think about the way that income needs are met, your short-term bucket is cash or cash equivalents. So it could be something like an annuity that pays a regular income stream regardless of what's happening to investment markets. You might have a longer-term bucket that has something more exposed to growth, and you're not going to touch it for a long period of time. That could be 5+ years. And then you might have the bucket in the middle that might be a hybrid of those two things together that's designed. So once the short-term bucket runs out, it then gets topped up with the medium-term bucket, and then so on and so forth. They all mature at different times. That's a really good way to prevent, well, one, try to manage this risk. But the other thing too is going back to the sleep test and the level of certainty and comfort retirement and retirement income should create for people. This strategy helps alleviate the concern about, oh geez, Donald Trump's gone and done something stupid like gone and attacked another country or kidnapped a world leader or whatever it may be. It tends to help smooth that out because you've got your short-term, your medium-term, and your long-term strategy in place to try and combat this issue that we're talking about, that you're drawing the wrong amount of money at the wrong time.
Yeah. And I think when you are starting to talk about that sleep test and you are starting to, talk about buckets, the other important part is to consider your allocation and how much is in growth assets, how much is in defensive assets, and the after of that and what that's going to have to your retirement objectives. The larger or the greater the portion that you're going to have in defensive assets, the more the sequencing risk is not going to be relevant because you're not getting that decline. Defensive assets, your fixed income assets like a term deposit are going to have, or they're not going to have the variability in asset price. So they cannot go down. So by its very nature, you're not going to experience the risk of if the market goes down earlier on. What you are going to experience, in that trade-off is, okay, well, firstly, if we're talking about periods of high inflation, then all of a sudden cost of living is getting more expensive and you've got a fixed level of income that is never increasing. The other thing is the longevity of your funds. I mean, naturally, if you're generating a 4% return as opposed to an 8% return, the 8% return is going to give you greater longevity in terms of your funds, more income in retirement than having a lower rate of growth by holding more in defensive assets. Sometimes people can also forget that when you're talking about retirement, it's, well, I don't really have a long-term bucket because I'm retired now. So now I've got to move, heavily to defensive assets, which is also not the right mentality because at the end of the day, say you talk, average life expectancy, and let's say you say, someone who retires at the age of 60 till your mid-80s, you're still talking about a 25-year time horizon. it's a long-term investment irrespective. Yes, a portion of the assets are a short-term investment, come in your, short-term, medium, and long-term bucket. But there are a portion of your assets that by its very nature are going to have a 20-year time horizon, or the expectation is to have a 20-year time horizon. So not looking at it as, well, my time is finished because I'm now drawing down upon it, and actually recognizing that, hey, I can take not necessarily risk, because you don't necessarily want to be taking speculative risk on the investments, but I can take a long-term view on the investments and the volatility associated with a portion of my assets.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a way to combat that as well too, right? I mean, I mentioned it before about the four, it's called the 4% rule. So basically saying that whatever the portfolio balance is, you take 4% each and every year, and that's designed to make sure that the portfolio lasts, and you're not going to run out of money. So if that's the case, and if that's the thing that makes people sleep comfortably at night, then you just adjust some of your spending. So it could be, from a discretionary perspective, maybe in a year where the markets aren't performing as well, you may not travel as much, or your travel appetite may change. You might not go domestic. You might not go international. You might go domestic. You might change the rate when the market does fall. You might turn around and say, hey, I'm going to pause or reduce the amount of withdrawals that we're making. Rather than pulling from a portfolio, you might go to that bucket that I was talking about and use cash or cash equivalents. There are ways to do that. But as you were talking, Andrew, I was just thinking of something completely sort of in conflict with what we were talking about. So use that scenario. You're a 60-year-old and you've got, say, 25 years to go. You're not going to need as much money. And we're coming at it from, okay, I need to make this last until I'm 85, until I kick the bucket, and then kick the bucket today and I run out of money tomorrow, right? That's the ultimate. In this hypothetical, different families, different people want to leave money in legacy and inheritance and things, but you could almost have a counter argument that says, I'm 60, I'm going to go hard and enjoy my 10 years and just live it up. And if I run out of money, we've got the social security net and what have you. And okay, I'll tend to slow down the track because I'm going to slow down the track. But I'm going to have a great time now. And I don't care what the economy is doing. I'm not going to worry about it. And I don't know if this is coming across as reckless or not, but there could be a world where that's somebody's wishes as well, and said, look, I've worked a whole career, 30, 40, 45 years saving up for my retirement. I don't want to have to adjust my lifestyle based on what's happening in global markets. I'm just going to just live it up and live my best life, that I've got all of the time and all of the money in the world that I never had before. I'm just going to enjoy it. And if I run out of money because markets have gone down, then so be it. But those best years that I've got left, I had the time of my life.
All goes down to sleep test, right?
Everybody's different. I'm just trying to create an alternative position. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, funnily enough, with client, we're going through pretty much that exact same scenario now. And it's not necessarily in terms of, living it up now, but it's rather looking at things like a reverse mortgage, which financially is not really the best thing to be doing. But yet, or his rationale is, I've got this asset in my house that I'm not utilizing to deliver me any form of income, and the only reason to preserve it is for my kids. I've, supported my kids, given them all of the opportunities. They're still going to inherit something at the end of it, but it's more important for me to enjoy my life now and, take some of that value to support my retirement income. Similar concept, but it's what works well for you does not work well for somebody else. And so that's why it becomes important to really look at retirement planning as it's not as simple as just saving enough.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just, do I have enough money? It's, okay, well, what does my lifestyle look like? What are the levers that I can pull? Am I entering into retirement with debt, for argument's sake? And now I have to draw money out in order to repay that. Am I entering retirement into something that's, more flexible in terms of my expenditure, and I can, pause holidays, and I can, delay holidays and adjust things? Do I want to do that? Does that suit my lifestyle? Now, do I have the short, medium, the long-term buckets to give myself flexibility, because at the end of the day, you are still talking for most people about a time frame of 20, 30 years or more. And so it I don't think is ever really as simple as I have this, and I draw this percentage, and that's it, and forget about it. It's what are the tweaks, what are the adjustments, and the micro movements you can make along the way add up to a large amount in the future. Because again, you're talking about such a long time period of compounding.
Yeah, and probably just to add my 2 cents on the back of that, if you think about what I was describing before, what we tend to see is that there's an income need in retirement, say this level here, I'm just putting my hand out there. In the first handful of years, that tends to spike and get inflated simply because people are, maybe they're retiring, they're upgrading the car, or they're doing those trips or those bucket list items of a lifetime where they need a lot of money. And then once it's going to sound really bad, but once you get that out of your system, it tends to normalize. So it's not the income drawdown requirements in retirement is not necessarily just a straight line or just flat. It does change, and we do tend to see that that does spike in the early years of retirement. But Andrew, fair bit in that, and I guess it's a good call out because anybody who's in that position, especially what we're starting to see with markets now, I think it's a good reminder that hey, it's not as simple as what it should be, and tooting our own horn here, advocating to get advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Bills, thanks again for another great podcast. Thanks to all of our viewers, listeners. If you got some value out of that, like, subscribe. It really does help us. And if you do want any further details of Billy and myself are in the show notes. Forward to catching on the next one. Thanks.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au. The information in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should consider whether the information is appropriate to your circumstances and seek professional advice before acting on any of the information provided. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of Akumin Financial Planning Pty Ltd.